Hello, welcome to the daily Henry George Daily Devotional number 10. We left off learning about the definitions of capital from other economists inferior to Henry George, although maybe Adam Smith and Mill deserve some respect. Let's go. Henry George writes, land, labor, and capital are the three factors of production. If we remember that capital is thus a term used in contradistinction to land and labor, we at once see that nothing properly included under either one of those terms can be properly classed as capital. I wholeheartedly agree, George. The term land necessarily includes not merely the surface of the earth as distinguished from the water and the air, but the whole material universe outside of man himself, for it is only by having access to land from which his very body is drawn that man can come in contact with or use nature. That sentence is one of the most important ones in the book, in my opinion. The term land embraces, in short, all natural materials, forces, and opportunities, and therefore nothing that is freely supplied by nature can be properly classed as capital. The reason that sentence is so important is because it is a very simple observation, and when we define land so clearly, when we start thinking more with George about economics, it is just like, how is it that all these other economists thought of land as a form of capital? It is so different, and it is so necessary. I don't know. Okay, we'll continue. Welcome to the chat, Scrubbles. A fertile field, a rich vein of ore, a falling stream which supplies power, may give to the possessor advantages equivalent to the possession of capital. But to class such things as capital would be to put an end to the distinction between land and capital, and so far as they relate to each other, to make the two terms meaningless. The term labor, in like manner, includes all human exertion, and hence human powers, whether natural or acquired, can never properly be classed as capital. In common parlance, we often speak of a man's knowledge, skill, or industry as constituting his capital. People nowadays call this human capital. But this is evidently a metaphorical use of language that must be eschewed in reasoning that aims at exactness. Superiority in such qualities may augment the income of an individual just as capital would, and an increase in the knowledge, skill, or industry of a community may have the same effect in increasing its production as would an increase of capital. But this effect is due to the increased power of labor, and not to capital. Increased velocity may give to the impact of a cannonball the same effect as increased weight, yet nevertheless weight is one thing and velocity another. I wish that Henry George had said mass instead of weight, but that's okay. He's not a physicist, he's an economist, and I'm neither. Thus we must exclude from the category of capital everything that may be included either as land or labor. Doing so, there remain only things which are neither land nor labor, but which have resulted from the union of these two original factors of production. Nothing can be properly capital that does not consist of these, that is to say, nothing can be capital that is not wealth. But it is from ambiguities in the use of this inclusive term, wealth, that many of the ambiguities which beset the term capital are derived. As commonly used, the word wealth is applied to anything having an exchange value. Some might say this is the exchange use of money would be relevant here, but anyway. But when used as a term of political economy, it must be limited to a much more definite meaning, because many things are commonly spoken of as wealth, which in taking account of collective or general wealth cannot be considered as wealth at all. Such things have an exchange value and are commonly spoken of as wealth, insomuch as they represent, as between individuals or between sets of individuals, the power of obtaining wealth, but they are not truly wealth, inasmuch as their increase or decrease does not affect the sum of wealth. Such are bonds, mortgages, promissory notes, bank bills, or other stipulations for the transfer of wealth. I'll mention here that Henry George writes about monetary ideas. He talks a little bit about it in this book, but he writes more about it in some other books. Anyway. Such are slaves whose value represents merely the power of one class to appropriate the earnings of another class. Such are lands or other natural opportunities, the value of which is but the result of the acknowledgment in favor of certain persons of an exclusive right to their use, and which represents merely the power thus given to the owners a share of the wealth produced by those who use them. This is a little foreshadowing of Henry George considering land monopoly and the exclusive use of all the land as analogous in many ways to owning people. And both of these are arbitrarily granted by the government in some human societies. Notably, slavery was granted a power granted by the government in many human societies, and currently the power to own and land and exclude everyone from it is granted by most human societies now. All right. Sorry. Yes. Increase in the amount of bonds, mortgages, notes, or bank bills cannot increase the wealth of the community that includes, as well as those who promise to pay, as those who are entitled to receive. The enslavement of a part of their number could not increase the wealth of a people, for what the enslavers gained, the enslaved would lose. Increase in land values does not represent increase in the commonwealth, for what landowners gain by higher prices, the tenants or purchasers who must pay them will lose. And all this relative wealth, which in common thought and speech, in legislation and law, is undistinguished from actual wealth, could, without the destruction or consumption of anything more than a few drops of ink and a piece of paper, be utterly annihilated. By enactment of the sovereign political power, debts might be cancelled, slaves emancipated, and land resumed as the common property of the whole people, without the aggregate wealth being diminished by the value of a pinch of snuff. For what some would lose, others would gain. I didn't read that with a good intonation, I suppose. There would be no more destruction of wealth than there was creation of wealth when Elizabeth Tudor enriched her favorite courtiers by the grant of monopolies, or when Boris Godunov made Russian peasants merchantable property. All things which have an exchange value are therefore not wealth, in the only sense in which the term can be used in political economy. Only such things can be wealth, the production of which increases, and the destruction of which decreases the aggregate of wealth. If we consider what these things are and what their nature is, we shall have no difficulty in defining wealth. All right. I'm glad we made it through there. That concludes our daily devotionals for this week. Have a nice weekend. Tell people about Georgism. Go read about more Georgism. I also am doing this. If you didn't know, there's a Spotify podcast version of this in case you want to listen that way. Bye-bye.